Could one political decision in Washington trigger a chain reaction leading to a global war? When a former Russian president warns that continued regime change policies could ignite a conflict on a scale not seen since 1945, the stakes are no longer regional. Tonight we examine what those warnings actually mean, what is driving them, and whether the current trajectory between major powers is moving toward confrontation or controlled deterrence. If escalation accelerates, the architecture of global security built after the Second World War could fracture under pressure from nuclear-armed states testing red lines. If tensions stabilize, the episode may reinforce deterrence norms that have prevented direct superpower conflict for nearly 8 decades. The difference between those outcomes depends on decisions made in Washington, Moscow, Tehran, and European capitals in the coming weeks. The latest warning came from Dmitry Medvedev, Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council and President of Russia from 2008 to 2012. In comments carried by the state news agency, he argued that continued efforts by the United States to reshape political systems abroad amount to a strategy aimed at preserving global dominance. He suggested that if this trajectory persists, a wider war could begin, potentially triggered by an unpredictable event. His framing positions current tensions not as isolated crises but as part of a systemic struggle over international order. This rhetoric emerges against a backdrop of simultaneous flashpoints. The conflict in Ukraine remains active more than 2 years after Russia's 2022 invasion. Western governments have supplied Kyiv with tens of billions of dollars in military and financial assistance. Russia views this as indirect confrontation. At the same time, tensions between Washington and Tehran have intensified following strikes on Iranian-linked targets. Medvedev argued that US actions have increased the vulnerability of American and allied officials, particularly after Iran declared what it described as a holy war in response to recent attacks. Iran's strategic posture has long relied on asymmetric capabilities, including missile and drone systems capable of reaching regional targets. The country has not yet crossed the threshold of openly developing nuclear weapons, but it has expanded uranium enrichment activities in recent years beyond limits established under the 2015 nuclear agreement. Medvedev claimed that recent events would likely push Tehran to accelerate nuclear ambitions, framing this as a predictable consequence of external pressure. Whether that assessment proves accurate depends on internal Iranian calculations about deterrence versus escalation. The reference to nearly 300 million Shiites worldwide underscores the broader ideological dimension. By describing the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as a spiritual father figure and now a martyr, Medvedev signaled that religious identity could consolidate political cohesion within Iran and across sympathetic communities. That narrative suggests that external threats may strengthen rather than weaken domestic unity, complicating strategies aimed at coercion. European governments have largely aligned with Washington's policies, providing support to Ukraine and coordinating sanctions on Moscow. Medvedev criticized this alignment as submissive behavior, implying that European autonomy has narrowed. From Moscow's perspective, NATO expansion and economic sanctions represent encroachment on its sphere of influence. From the European viewpoint, collective defense arrangements are a response to Russian aggression. These competing interpretations illustrate how security dilemmas can harden positions on all sides. The nuclear dimension heightens risk. Russia and the United States together possess roughly 90% of the world's nuclear warheads, according to estimates from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Both countries maintain triad capabilities across land-based missiles, submarine launch systems, and strategic bombers. Medvedev emphasized that Washington understands the catastrophic consequences of nuclear conflict, referencing historical precedents such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki to underscore destructive potential. His argument implies that mutual fear remains the ultimate restraint. Two what-if scenarios clarify the stakes. First, what if negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv stall while Western military assistance increases? Russia may interpret expanded support as direct intervention, potentially widening the battlefield or intensifying strikes on infrastructure. Escalation spirals could emerge if miscalculation occurs, particularly around NATO borders. Second, what if back-channel diplomacy gains traction and a limited ceasefire framework takes shape? Even partial de-escalation could reduce the risk of accidental confrontation and stabilize energy and commodity markets that remain sensitive to war developments. Energy markets, grain exports, and global supply chains remain intertwined with these conflicts. Russia and Ukraine together accounted for nearly 30% of global wheat exports before 2022. Disruptions have already driven volatility in food prices across Africa and the Middle East. Meanwhile, sanctions targeting Russian oil have reconfigured trade flows, redirecting shipments toward Asia. Each escalation threatens further economic fragmentation. Medvedev also raised concerns that negotiations with Kyiv might serve as a pause, allowing Ukraine to rearm. This reflects a long-standing suspicion in Moscow that diplomatic overtures can mask strategic delay. Such mistrust reduces incentives for compromise. At the same time, Western policymakers argue that sustained assistance deters further territorial expansion. These opposing logics create a feedback loop in which each side views its own actions as defensive and the others as aggressive. The broader geopolitical contest centers on whether the post-Cold War order, characterized by US predominance, is giving way to a multipolar structure. Russia and China have advocated for alternatives to dollar-dominated financial systems and Western-led institutions. The United States maintains extensive alliances and forward military deployments. Iran operates within this environment as a regional power navigating sanctions and security threats. The convergence of these dynamics amplifies tension beyond any single battlefield. Ultimately, the credibility of deterrence depends on signaling and restraint. Nuclear weapons have prevented direct great power war since 1945, but they also create constant risk of misinterpretation. Leaders must calculate not only military capability but domestic political pressures, alliance commitments, and reputational costs. Statements warning of global war serve both as deterrent messaging and as domestic positioning within Russia's political landscape. The world stands at a junction defined by power competition, technological capability, and historical memory. Stability rests on fragile understandings forged after catastrophic wars. Conflict remains possible, but so does recalibration through diplomacy and deterrence. Whether current tensions harden into a broader confrontation or settle into managed rivalry will depend on choices made under pressure. In moments like this, the margin between crisis and containment narrows, and vigilance becomes as important as rhetoric.